Welcome to Trigger the Truth with attorney Jason Guida, where we unravel the ins and outs of Massachusetts firearms law.
Welcome to Trigger the Truth, Massachusetts Firearms Laws and Policy with attorney Jason Guida. Jason, you had mentioned that part of your background getting started involved a lot of gun-related or firearms-related crimes, gang-related cases in Western Massachusetts. Tell us more about what those cases were like for you, what your experience was there, and especially how you made that transition to that director role.
Sure. So firearms cases are difficult from both sides, from the defense and from the prosecution. Violations of our gun laws in many cases involve what are called minimum mandatory sentences, which means if you are convicted, there's a guaranteed period of imprisonment that you're going to get. So, for example, if you're a resident of New Hampshire and you come to Massachusetts and you don't have a firearms license, there's a real possibility that you could end up in jail for 18 months as a minimum under our laws. At that time in my life, I was really focused on the law enforcement side. So that was my job, to prosecute those cases. But those cases generally will go to trial, and they go to trial because of the stakes, the risks that people are facing. It makes sense to go to trial and hope for an acquittal. That experience helped me transition into my position as the director of the Firearms Records Bureau. It really helped me learn how to work with law enforcement at the ground level, the police officers who are investigating crimes. What are they looking for? How do they investigate things? And, how can you help them? And that was my job, again, on the law enforcement side as the director of the Firearms Records Bureau. What I do now dovetails onto that. I recognized when I was at the Firearms Records Bureau that there were a lot of people that I could help. And I saw, a lot of people out there practicing in this area that didn't have the same background and expertise that I did. And that's why my practice has been successful. I've been able to use my background on the law enforcement side to help my clients on the other side, the defense side, if you will.
Experiences and little bits of knowledge that you've picked up that apparently others really don't have. How has your experience and background really helped guide and influence your ability to help?
Yeah, of course. Sure. So I know how the sausage is made, I think is how I would say it. I know how the licensing process works, how the computer systems are accessed, what's inside that system that creates these records, what the officers do in order to, conduct a background check, how long those background checks take, who's doing those background checks. From the prosecution side, I understand how the district attorneys are reviewing cases, the things that they are weighing, the things that they're considering, who their supervisors are, who's making the ultimate decisions. These are the things that I've learned. And again, knowing how to work with a law enforcement officer. And, that takes time and understanding of what their perspective is. And you start to learn that from, as a prosecutor on how they're looking at cases and what is important to them. And oftentimes you're able to, speak to a police officer before a charge is issued and perhaps lessen the charge or even make the charge not, or have the police not file the complaint. So that experience definitely helps me, help my clients.
Now, speaking as your average layperson, I think there's generally this idea that those who are involved in the legal system, the justice system, we expect them to understand what the laws are for any given case. And so to hear you explain how someone who's been in the thick of it and understands these laws like the back of their hand, having to sometimes explain it to the judge or to the prosecutor on what the actual law is, I think that'd be surprising to many that there's perhaps a lack of education or understanding in this area.
But it's true. You're in Massachusetts. You're dealing with guns. Most people who are in the community, the firearms community, know that I'll say the word. There's a prejudice towards firearms and firearms owners here. It's the culture in our state, and yeah, oftentimes, particularly with any firearms case, there's a sense that it's far more serious, at least from the perspective of the district attorney's office and the court system and the police, than quite frankly it really is. I know it's surprising, and many of my clients are surprised when they encounter the system. But the truth is that I've seen it. I'm ready for it. I deal with it every day.
Jason, you had mentioned earlier that in Massachusetts, as far as the law is concerned, the size of a as far as the law is concerned, the size of a magazine is smaller than what most gun enthusiasts or gun owners would consider large. So would you just mind explaining to us what the actual assault weapons ban is?
Absolutely, and you can even tell from the question, right? It's confusing, and it's confusing to a lot of people that are trying to comply with our laws. It's confusing to law enforcement, people that are trying to actually enforce the laws. So in basically, and this is kind of just a ground level approach to this, Massachusetts has an assault weapons ban. We incorporated the federal assault weapons ban, which was passed under the Clinton administration back in 1994. What incorporated means is we added it into our laws in 2004. So we adopted that language, even though under the federal law, that federal law sunsetted, it ended in 2004. We included it and kept it going here in Massachusetts. So what the assault weapons ban says, essentially, is that there are certain weapons that you are not allowed to have no matter what. Those are what they call the enumerated list. For example, a Colt AR-15 is unlawful to possess in Massachusetts. Then there is the second part of the assault weapons ban, which talks about what they call the features test. So there are certain what the gun community often calls the evil features that a weapon can have. So, for example, in the case of a rifle, if that rifle has, assuming it's semi-automatic and capable of accepting a detachable magazine, if that rifle has a folding stock or a threaded barrel, that is an unlawful rifle. Now, there is this big exception, and the big exception is unless it was lawfully possessed prior to September 13th, 1994. That's the grandfather clause. Okay. When it comes to magazines, as you mentioned, Massachusetts requires you to have a 10-round magazine. The only large capacity magazines, meaning a magazine that exceeds 10 rounds, and that's the legal term, and I understand that everyone calls them standard capacity magazines, but the statute says large capacity magazines. Any magazine that is capable of accepting more than 10 rounds. Again, there's a grandfather clause. So if it was lawfully possessed prior to September 13th, 1994, you can possess it. If not, you can't.
Now, personally, I'm trying to understand this right here in our episode. When you say the grandfather clause, 1994, how does that apply to, say, somebody transferring ownership? Does this only apply to the older people who were around to lawfully obtain those?
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely. So, the way it's been interpreted is if it was in existence prior to that date, it can be transferred, and that's how Massachusetts has handled it, at least from the law enforcement side. So typically, you want to know what the manufacture date of these items are. That can be tricky, particularly with large capacity magazines. Um, you also kind of touched on another point, which we can talk about, is there is the assault weapons ban that is in the statute. There is also the Attorney General's enforcement notice of 2016. Now, what that enforcement notice did is it tried to define a copy or duplicate of the enumerated list. So the actual language of the assault weapons ban says any copy or duplicate of these weapons are illegal. So any copy or duplicate of a Colt AR-15 are unlawful to own. In 2016, the Attorney General's office issued an advisory where they said that if you have a copy or duplicate of an AR-15, it's illegal. And this is what a copy or duplicate is. A copy or duplicate is any, for example, in the case of a rifle that has interchangeable parts, or it has the same type of operating system as a weapon on that enumerated list. So if it has interchangeable parts with a Colt AR-15, it's illegal to own, according to the enforcement notice. Now, you asked about transferring it. There seems to be an indication, at least anecdotally, that you're allowed to transfer copies or duplicates that were lawfully possessed prior to that enforcement notice date. And again, you're allowed to transfer or any weapons that were lawfully possessed prior to September 13th, 1994. So that kind of grandfather status stays with the weapons. And in the case of magazines, the pre-94 magazines stay.
So what else should Massachusetts gun owners know about the ban?
Yeah, absolutely. So what gun owners need to know right now is that there is a law enforcement priority on these types of weapons due to a number of things. Increased prevalence, increase attention by, again, the Attorney General's office, and media as well. So law enforcement officers are being trained on this ban, both the statutory ban and the enforcement notice, and are on the lookout for weapons or magazines that don't comply. And they're getting more sophisticated. Some of the officers are kind of baseline and they don't fully understand it, and I see that all the time. But there are other officers out there that I've worked with that do understand it. They understand that the assault weapons ban doesn't just apply to rifles, but also applies to pistols and shotguns too. And there are evil features that would apply to a pistol or a shotgun as well. And they're on the lookout for those. They're starting to be able to recognize just by sight the types of magazines that are not legal to own here. Because they didn't exist prior to September 13th, 1994. There's been a significant uptick in my caseload over the last 2 years. And there's a correlation between the trainings that law enforcement are now getting, I believe, and my caseload and the new assault weapon ban type charges that I'm handling. So what gun owners should know is, know what's in your inventory, know what's in your safe, know what's in your closet right now. Know that just because somebody told you it's pre-ban doesn't mean it is. Know what the unlawful characteristics are, and make sure your weapon doesn't have them. Because again, I'm seeing more and more prosecutions now.
So understanding that your understanding that there are more and more cases coming to you, and I'm assuming all across the state are happening concerning this ban and the enforcement of it, have there been, because since there's more volume of these cases coming through, have there been any significant challenges to the ban itself?
Yeah, sure. So there has in Massachusetts. So there have been other challenges in other states, but we're really focused on Massachusetts in the First Circuit. There was a lawsuit filed in federal court in the first. We're in the First Circuit here, but in the district court in Massachusetts, and ultimately the decision was not favorable. The court held that when it comes to the Second Amendment, the Second Amendment protects the lawful possession of rifles, shotguns, firearms by individuals for self-defense, both inside and outside the home. However, assault weapons are what the court found were a subcategory of rifles, which could be deemed unusual and dangerous, and therefore the ban was constitutional. Now we're anticipating further appeals. But quite frankly, where we are situated in the First Circuit, the likelihood of that ban being overturned is very, very low. It's probably going to take a Supreme Court decision in order to, invalidate this ban here in Massachusetts and some other states, California, New Jersey, have similar type bans. But the likelihood of that happening anytime soon is low. And I think that's important too, because people also need to know our legislature is set to very soon in June of 2024 pass new legislation on the assault weapons ban. And they are going to incorporate, meaning take the Attorney General's enforcement notice and actually add it into our laws. And so, we've got this one ban and we got this enforcement notice, which has largely not been enforced, although I do actually represent a gun dealer right now who has been charged under that enforcement notice. But that enforcement notice, which many people say is not law, is going to become law very soon. And people need to be aware of that and be very mindful of what is in your safe. Know what's in your safe.
I can imagine representing many people who advocate for or exercise their Second Amendment rights in Massachusetts could be a tough thing to do at times, given the culture there, like you had mentioned. What else can gun owners do to protect themselves under the law?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I'm telling my clients is buyer beware. I am routinely getting calls, and I've represented a number of people who have gone to a firearms dealer and purchased a magazine or purchased a weapon and suddenly find themselves in legal jeopardy. And they say to me, well, my dealer said this was legal. He said it was pre-ban. Just because they tell you it's true doesn't mean it is. Know what you're buying before you buy it, because simply saying, well, he told me so, is not really a defense. It's very, very difficult at that stage, once you're charged, to come in and try to point to somebody else and blame them. You're in possession of it, and you need to know what you have. There are a number of gun dealers out there. Not going to name names, but they come across my desk quite a bit that are selling things that they're not supposed to be selling, and doing so to people who do not know any better. And these people are taking on risk. The other thing, we see a lot of is the sale of what are called lower receivers, which are incomplete, oftentimes rifles. And people are buying these lower receivers, believing that they can build out their own AR type firearm or AR type rifle. And again, you've got to remember the 2016 enforcement notice. Most likely, when you build that out, that's going to be in violation of that notice. And as I said, that notice is likely going to become law very soon. So don't be out there trying to build and get around the laws. The guys that are doing that, some get away with it, but some get caught. Know that if you're going to do it, you better put some money aside because you're going to need a lawyer. And other examples, again, know what is in the assault weapons ban. Know that it covers not just rifles, but it covers shotguns and pistols too. In Massachusetts, we define a firearm as having a Sam, can we cut that piece out? Okay. Yeah. So in Massachusetts, we have firearms which fall under the pistol definition, and pistols oftentimes are going to include our short barrel, what are called short barreled rifles. Those short barreled rifles may fall under the assault pistol definition. So know what you have in your safe, because law enforcement are being trained on this, and they know when they're coming to your house, they're going to know what you have and whether it's legal or not. And if they don't know, there are people on the law enforcement side that can tell them. So again, be mindful of what you are building, buying, and know what's in your safe.
Well, Jason, thank you so much, because I've learned a lot, and I think our listeners have too. I'm excited to get into other conversations with you soon.
Sure. Great. Thank you, Sam.
This has been Trigger the Truth, Massachusetts Firearms Laws and Policy with attorney Jason Guida. I'm Sam Henninger. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, because we'll continue to have great conversations just like this.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.